As 80s nostalgia doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, and we inevitably keep going back to the past, the natural conclusion at this point in time is to go back to the future.
The doc said all his clock's 25 minutes slow.
Doc? Do you have any idea how important this was to me?
How does this 80s blockbuster and its two late 80s, early 90s sequels hold up in the present? Feel free to like and subscribe, and let's, you guessed it, go
Back to the Future!
Back to the Future, in a nutshell, is the story of a senior high school student, Marty McFly,
I'm late for school!
and his much older friend, Doc Emmett Brown,
Marty, you made it!
who invents a time machine out of a DeLorean,
What of a DeLorean?
the car that otherwise looked like a fake Lotus or Mazda, but ended up becoming as iconic as it gets in terms of 80s pop culture. McFly, who ends up being sent back to 1955 by way of a business misunderstanding with Libyan nationals, is not only stuck in the era of one black and white TV per household,
Nobody has two television sets.
but has managed to prevent his mum from falling in love with his eccentric reclusive dad. That must have been hard. And thus, his mum fancies him by way of looking at his underpants.
I've never seen purple underwear before, Calvin. That is your name, isn't it? Calvin Klein? It's written all over your underwear.
Young Calvin Klein must get his parents to hook up so he and his middle-aged siblings can be born, whilst preventing the most iconic bully in cinematic history from compromising this operation.
And McFly!
What are you looking at, butthead?
With, of course, the assistance of a younger Doc Brown and historical lightning enabling Calvin Klein to go back
To the future!
where he's Marty McFly, playing his guitar too darn loud,
You're just too darn loud.
whilst his loving 80s girlfriend sees him as the apple of her eye. That's right, the future, the 80s, where his principal looks like the bold bloke from Top Gun, and he's playing The Breakfast Club with his beautiful girlfriend, igniting the anger of the man who despises slackers.
You're a slacker.
So great was this mid-80s picture that 4 years later, when Calvin Klein, Marty McFox, was pushing 30 and the 80s were almost done, the Hollywood studio machine would bring us back-to-back sequels, set in the far-off future of 2015 with flying cars and no smartphones,
Are you on Instagram?
and then cowboys in the Old West,
And McFly!
which is maybe west of the Wild West. In other words, Back to the Future is not only great, but one of the greatest movies ever, and its sequels were ever so slightly flawed, but pretty darn good as well. Back to the Future, legacy-wise, is by no means forgotten, but is partially in terms of its greatness and how popular it was in the 80s. In essence, the greatness comes from the fact it's an 80s high school film and a sci-fi action-adventure time-traveling movie that happens to have great actors
Daddy-o.
bringing great acting to the table.
Not all that talk.
Well, I figured. What the hell?
That's the essence as far as I'm concerned. It's ultra iconic,
My name is Darth Vader.
I am your father.
From the planet Vulcan.
Live long and prosper, Connor.
but brings a lot of layers and food for thought to the movie experience, i.e. why is Marty's family still living in the same place if they're successful now? Why is Marty the same person if he changed his reality but everyone else is different?
Marty, I always wear a suit to the office.
Personally, I believe its main strength is it was that one film everyone could agree they liked back in the 80s and early 90s.
Say that again.
It was that one film everyone could agree they liked back in the 80s and early 90s. Because it's about fate, nostalgia, and most importantly, family. I grew up experiencing this movie more than any other with family and family friends.
Do you have any idea how important this was to me?
Michael J. Fox's magnetism, ultimately, is what hooked us all in. If they had never fired Eric Stoltz for Fox, it would have just been The Wild Life with time travel.
You're not my boyfriend anymore, okay?
Unlike the rising star TC, Fox was a reactive actor.
You want a Pepsi, pal? You're gonna pay for it.
Look, just give me something without any sugar in it, okay?
Who was a more team-embracing teammate. He's not punching the doc like TC is to
Coughlin's Law. Anything else?
He's not berating his spurgy dad like TC does to his severely autistic brother.
Did you hear what I said? Shut up!
but I don't know what to say. Oh, just say anything, George. Say, well, whatever's natural.
We have Michael J. Fox's interactions with his contemporaries.
If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
And then we have TC's.
You!
I wish I wasn't so scared. George, there's nothing to be scared of. All it takes is a little self-confidence.
There's more of a reciprocity in his interactions. He's a teammate as much as a lover with Jennifer, not just sexual attraction.
I'd like to try the orgasm, please.
How many would you like?
McFly's parents may be defeated deadbeats, and his older siblings look on course to be even worse than their folks. But Marty's kind of cool. Why should he go back to the 50s when his life in the 80s rules? I always loved the 80s bit of the first film. I was like, don't go to the car park when Doc calls you. You just stay in the 80s and ride your skateboard whilst holding onto the back of cars. Whereas the show Goodnight Sweetheart, of course Rodney, from Only Fools and Horses, wants to stay in the 40s with his bird who loves him. In the 90s he's a mug with his sarky missus and his stupid mate, listening to 2 Unlimited in Cricklewood.
And the music, compared to this, Boney M were talented.
The fact Marty McFly is cool means he has no desire to stay in the past and exploit everyone's naivety. Hence the picture's heightened suspense of getting back to the future. Eric Stoltz is the American version of Rodney. At first he'd be super depressed, then he'd want to stay in the past and shag his mum, Leah Thompson. The only reason he wouldn't is cause she wouldn't hook up with his dad, which would cause a
Retroactive abortion?
Guy Silverman cracks me up.
Shut up.
The whole film, from Biff to Goldie Wilson to the diner owner, is cool, as in the legacy of Hill Valley. But the fact, in the midst of all of this, Marty himself was inherently relatable and likable is what makes Back to the Future above and beyond most films. Unlike director Robert Zemeckis' other smash hit, Forrest Gump.
Run, Forrest, run!
Essentially a history of modern America for dummies. You want to be like McFly. Who the f wants to be like Goofy Gump? The village idiot whose bird Jenny shags the whole of the United States, then gives him a one-off sympathy shag once she's contracted HIV or hepatitis B or hepatitis C or LMNOP. She has a STD kid, then dies, leaving Goofy Gump to be a male single mother. Jennifer, on the other hand, the real Jennifer, not Elizabeth Shue with a moose wig. Moose. She was super intimate Fly. When he's playing guitar, the genuine smile of admiration and attraction and affection. The real life actress didn't reprise her role to go and look after her sick mum. She's actually a good kid, but more importantly, she is domesticated. She's not touring America, shagging everyone like the fake Jenny. And why are you calling her Jenny anyway, when that's essentially the same name as Jennifer? Call her Penny. Again, 30 plus years later, we remember Marty McFly fondly. These are the evocative points from Back to the Future that make it the definitive 80s movie experience in terms of its meta qualities and everything else. So for me, its weaknesses are in fact its strengths. I can explain. First movie is not perfect, but near perfection. Essentially movie perfection, as nothing is perfect. My main nitpick with the first flick is the whole George McFly characterization by actor Crispin Glover. Crispin Glover is the eccentric Burke in real life.
Do you want to arm wrestle? No. I can kick. Okay, I'm gonna go check on the top.
But really good as George McFly.
You leave her alone.
And more or less, the eccentric Burke in Back to the Future.
Give me a milk. Chocolate.
Getting bullied by Biff due to his passiveness and social inadequacies.
Think, McFly, think!
In hindsight, after seeing Leah Thompson in other 80s high school movies, that chick never hooks up with George McFly. He could punch Biff 100 times and rescue her. Maybe he's the hero in the moment, but her, with him, 3 kids, 30 plus years of marriage? Nah. She's the deceptive good girl who's a lusty little minx kitten behind the scenes.
She's deceptively innocent, isn't she?
She was just like, "Arr." I mean, I played her like a kitty cat in heat.
In The Wildlife, she's shagging the strapping buck older police officer after dumping nerdy Eric Stoltz. In Some Kind of Wonderful, the masterpiece, she's the cool girl, ashamed of being from the wrong side of the tracks, shagging the cool trust fund jock.
We're getting feisty.
Who's meant to be 17, but looks about 35.
I'm sorry, my hand slipped.
Eric Stoltz, bless him, fancies the living daylights out of her. That always felt like asymmetrical attraction. They still don't hook up, as Stoltz accepts he's not a jock.
I'm sorry, my hand slipped.
but a fringy cerebral nerd. Hence, there is no way, no shot in hell, Lorraine Baines hooks up with the eccentric cerebral dude
Stories, science fiction stories.
who doesn't even remotely have an alpha side.
Hey, real mature guys.
Cut it out.
Very funny.
Why don't you mind your own business?
That punch was self-defense and pent-up frustration, which makes him a hero for a few days, yes, but not someone she's going to get impregnated by 3 times. I don't care if it was the 50s. To piggyback on the Bill Simmons podcast,
if you take Joaquin Phoenix 10 years later, put him in this movie, it's just more interesting.
an actor like Joaquin Phoenix is the only person I can also think of who could be the eccentric outcast and also be cool and have swagger if need be. Or before that, Bobby D in Taxi Driver.
Would you like to come have some coffee and pie with me?
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because I think that you are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen.
You're in a hell, and you're gonna die in a hell like the rest of us.
De Niro was way too old and Phoenix was too young then, so yes, Crispin Glover was great and iconic as a unique character. I praise his performance, but I don't see him having an alternative side that could really attract Lorraine. The chick from all the 80s movies.
I have to ask Lorraine out, but I don't know how to do it.
In part 2, we look at the 2 sequels that saw a man pushing 30 reprise his role as a 17-year-old. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one, where we go back to the future.